Welcome to Grace Between the Lines, where scripture, stories, and inspirations of grace encourage us to look with fresh eyes between the lines of life and at our everyday experiences to realize God's presence there. We welcome you to this circle of grace that surrounds each moment of life, as we really do live in the company of grace. Reverend Doris Mars, pastor at St. John in Findlay, and Dorothy Harris, mother and a member at Glenwood in Toledo, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Are you lifelong member there, or have you been other places?
No, I've been at Glenwood for 39 years.
39 years. Okay. So you've seen some changes down there too, huh?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Just thank you for being willing to sit and chat about this thing called grace. It's really wonderful. So let's just kind of jump off, and when you hear the word grace, what does that mean to you, or what do you think when you hear grace?
I'll defer to the elder. What do you think? What comes to your mind?
Well, I think every day that I wake up, God has granted me grace. Whatever circumstances I'm challenged with. And I think the most recent, and maybe not the most recent, but 2 years ago, I fell. And I broke my pelvis and my shoulder.
Oh my goodness.
And I could not walk. So I had to learn to walk. I spent a month in rehab trying to learn to walk. But God granted me grace to come through that. Till now I walk, even though I walk with a cane, I'm able to walk. So that to me, that was God's grace to me. And also the last year I suffered a heart attack.
Oh my goodness.
Open heart surgery, and went on dialysis all at the same time. And I think that was another powerful testimony to me about God's grace for me, that I'm still here. And in all of that, I was able to minister to people that I came in contact with in the rehab, and with friends that came to visit me on the phone. I mean, I was still able to do a lot of things that God has just granted me grace to do.
Can you share one of those moments, or a story about a person that you felt grace from, as well as your ministering to? Does anything kind of come to mind?
Well, yes, I think I can't just pin it down to just one person.
Okay.
But just a multitude of friends that grace was working both ways, through them to me and me to them. And so, it was one of the things that God used, to minister to me in the times when I was down and needed someone else to pray for me.
Yes.
Because
absolutely. So the power of prayer.
Yes. Yes.
Yep. And sometimes that comes in really unexpected experiences and relationships, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
And sometimes it doesn't always come from, I mean, you expect that from your close family, but I have this close relationship with my neighborhood. I've lived here for 60 some years.
Oh, that's
And
beautiful.
yeah, and I served as my block watch leader for 12.
Okay.
And, you know, I was, to this day, the same folks that live in the neighborhood was able to be a support for me.
Mm,
That is just wonderful to know that, you know, you can live somewhere for so long and you still have neighbors that you kind of grew up with.
that is so cool.
It's,
Yeah, especially in our world today. We're so transient. We're moving all over the place. And so
Now we are, yes.
to be really rooted in a place,
yeah,
and know those folks inside and out and to feel that relationship.
yes.
That is a gift.
Yeah. When I think of God's grace, um, two words come to mind: unconditional love,
Hmm.
because I know that's what it is.
Mhm.
And I have had the opportunity in life to live that, to be challenged to live that. It's so easy to kind of jump off with a reptilian response when people do something to hurt you, or
Mhm.
they do something to disappoint you, or they're just not there for you
Mhm.
when they said they were going to be. And so, having had a number of those experiences in life, it looked like that was my training ground for to know
Hmm.
unconditional love, how that lives out. Um, because I had to learn to stop and be silent and listen to the possibility that there may be pain on the other side that's coming at me that doesn't have anything to do with me. And that this is a moment where I can extend God's love to somebody that's in their own pain. They don't even realize they're in it, they're just pushing it at me.
Mhm.
And so, having those experiences, not just as a pastor, but as a person in this world with people, um, has taught me really what grace is.
Mhm.
It's a pause moment. It's a listening moment. It's a being aware that there is brokenness and pain among people, and they often don't know how to express it. So everybody gets hit by it.
Mhm. So Doris, who taught you um, about that grace?
Life experience really taught me. Um, I can't think of a moment in time where, I grew up in the church, and I've had a lot of different denominational experiences
Mhm.
other than Lutheran. I tell people I'm Bethel Luther Baptist Costa Elka.
I love it.
So and each one of those, I've spent some time in those church bodies, with the exception of the Pentecostal. That was the influence from my grandmother, just being around her and watching her. And she
Okay.
was in Church of God in Christ. And so, but having that influence of those different traditions and worship experiences shaped me a whole lot. And when it came to living life, then what happened is I started drawing off the
Mhm.
different ones, um, because different denominations, different church bodies emphasize different things. They'll all say Christian, and they'll all proclaim Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, the Messiah that saves the world. But then after that, it gets kind of diverse in what the theology is and what the practices are and all that kind of stuff. So as I lived life, I was just drawing off of the different things that I had encountered from different church bodies. And life experiences just gave me opportunity. I've been through a lot of hurt in my life.
Mhm.
And so living those hurts and disappointments, I could either, and maybe for a period of time, I sat in it and just let it overwhelm me. But at a moment of remembering that I have a faith that
Mm.
I can draw from, that's when I got up and said, okay, Lord, talk to me. And I have this phrase that I use with God. I say, okay, Lord, I'm pulling up a chair, let's talk.
I love it.
And that's how I get my faith energized in times of trouble,
Mhm.
because I know God is listening and God can listen. That's the grace of God. God can listen to anything I bring in any way that I bring it.
Mhm.
So if I'm sobbing, crying, if I'm so distressed I can't speak, if I'm so upset that I'm cussing and fussing, it doesn't matter. God handles it with me. And I like that grace that exists between me and God. And so that taught me how to be more grace filled with people in the world.
Mhm.
And it changed my life. It changed me from living in a constant state of
Yeah.
distress and disgruntlement with people
Mhm.
to like, wait a minute, let me just listen for a while and see what's going on with this person.
So it's an intentional choice to take time out from whatever that situation is to hear from God what the message might be in
Yes.
handling whatever it is, the relationship, the hard conversation, the
Hmm. Yeah, it's very intentional, and it's not usually announced. Like say if I'm with someone, I don't say, hold on, wait a minute.
no, you don't do
No, I don't do that. Oh, hold on a minute. I gotta go talk to God. I'll be right back with you. No, that I don't do that.
that. Uh-huh.
It's so intentional and automatic. It just begins to happen
Yeah.
within, and as I relate to the person,
Mhm.
that I'm dealing with, or the situation that I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
As because sometimes most of the time I'm also discovering too. What's up, Lord? What is going on here?
Mhm.
And I'll be asking those questions in my spirit, and God and I will be having conversation, and I'll be listening, and it's like one ear to God and one ear to the person or the situation that I'm in, and I'm in the middle of it, and
Mhm.
it's quite an intense experience, but it's grace.
Yeah.
It is how grace lives and has its being in my life.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. That's beautiful. So you mentioned your grandma
Yes,
and your experience with her. Is that your mom's mom?
yes, it is. The only grandparent that I knew
Okay.
growing up was my maternal grandmother.
Mhm.
Um, Never knew my grandparents on my father's side or my paternal grandfather. So she was it.
Okay.
And she had a very, very strong faith, a living faith. Grandma, whenever she opened her mouth, she was talking about God
Mm.
and how God was working
Mhm.
in whatever was going on, or she was speaking, praising God. She was speaking, praying to God. Her relationship with God was a living, breathing, active relationship that as a child I could witness. And did I know and understand it all then? No. But I witnessed it and I kept looking, and she was consistent. It wasn't one of these things where she was like that one day and then several other days she was like, no, grandmama was like that all the time. She was always talking, praising, praying. as she walked around with her eyes open from room to room in her daily living. It was her and God. And so as a child, I watched that and I said, By the time I got to my adolescence, I was like, I want that.
Mm.
Whatever wherever she got that, I want that.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that I had to find it in a church body. So, I started visiting different churches and thinking, is it over here? Is it over there? Is it over there? Ultimately, the journey led me back to myself. The understanding by grace am I saved through faith. It's in me. It's already there. My baptism invited me,
Mhm.
and I was already walking in it and didn't know it.
And then you had your beautiful mother, an offspring of that graceful presence, who I have experienced, of course, not as often as you, but have seen it. And you, Miss Dorothy, so like you just live it. And
Yep.
and so can you talk about your experience with your mother or your family, or where this I don't know, gift of grace came from?
Well, I think it came more from my mother,
Okay.
and as Doris is expressed her grandmother. And as a child, I remember my mother, we was always as kids, we always was in church on Sunday. And at that time, when I grew up, you went to church on Sunday and you might be there all day because you would go to Sunday school and then you would go to church, and sometimes you would even have a meal at church. So, and then they would sometimes have church in the evening. So I was in church a lot. I was growing up as a child, but I think that that was I was just rooted in in the spirit as a young child. And as Doris, when Doris became into the Lutheran church, and she had such spirit, and I really encouraged her at one point in her life. I said, well, maybe you might want to be a pastor. And I said, and we talked about it, and it was really a sacrifice when she decided that, well, she would go to seminary, and it would mean that uh, someone would have to care for her two teenage kids.
Mm.
And that was the grace of God that gave me to say, I will take care of the kids while you away every week to seminary, and then she would come home on the weekend. But we had a family discussion as to where the kids would stay, and that they wanted to remain in their home, and they didn't want to come live in my home as in grandmama's home. So I would go and spend the night every night,
Wow.
and then I would be with them and then send them off to school and get in my car and drive home in the morning. And then I had to make sure that I was taking my grandson to football practice, picking him up after school. He was at Central at the time, Central Catholic, and Dorothy was at the Toledo School for the Arts. So I did a lot of driving, picking kids up. And that was grace of God for me to be able to do that. And so we made it through, and the kids graduated, and she graduated too.
All at the same time.
About the same time from
Yeah, the
Trinity.
same time.
Yeah, because I think Aaron was the senior, right?
Mhm.
In high school, and Dorothy was at she graduated.
Well, I mean, he graduated the same year I finished seminary, so
Yes.
we had all that going on at one time.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, a lot of stories. I'm not short on stories because I'm constantly, and mom is too, and her mother was. We come from generations of being constantly aware of God's presence, God's action, God's grace, and that is something to talk about,
Mhm.
to tell the world, to let others know that God is real.
Mhm. I think the most powerful message that I have heard from you, both of you, is living out the gospel in your everyday life. So
Yes.
you know the love of Jesus, and the grace is about, even though you've had these hard experiences, living that out and being so intentional about that, and
Yeah.
seeing Jesus in those experiences and in those people, when most of us in culture, we go backwards, and you're both leaning into and
Always.
sharing just that love of Christ in so many and amazing ways.